Good morning, Kevin here. Where am I today? Well, I'm standing outside this church and it is St Mary's of Edwinstowe, and it's a stone built church, and I'm looking up at the steeple and the clock on the tower, and I've got just in front of me the south porch, and in here I'm going to be learning about the history of Robin Hood. So I'm going to head on in and then we're going to have a word with Greg and see what sort of things he can tell me. So here we go. We're going to go in through the south porch, through these big doors, and we are in the main entrance of the porch now. Let me just show you around here. Look at these lovely tributes here. And we go in through here, and immediately you see the font to my left hand side, and just in front of me is this amazingly dressed character whose name is Greg. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning, welcome.
Thank you very much. And you're going to guide me through some of the history of Robin and Marian, and you are dressed as a bowman.
Absolutely.
And you are a Sherwood Forester.
I can be, yes.
You can be, yes.
I wouldn't admit it, because hunting in the forest, unless you are a special permission, was punishable by all sorts of nasties.
Yeah.
And in fact, if I walked through the forest with a string on my bow,
yes,
that would be an intent to hunt,
yeah,
and that would count as well. I wouldn't actually have to have a deer or anything as evidence.
Right.
So what an archer would do was de-string his bow, pretend it was a walking stave, maybe tie some foliage around it, and keep the string private.
Right.
So he'd wrap it up,
Yeah.
and put it under his hat.
Ah, right.
Which is why the phrase in English comes, keeping a secret, you keep it under your hat.
Ah, okay.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. And what is your bow made of, may I ask?
It's composite, so we've got different woods.
Yep.
Because what it was normally was yew, and made of the heartwood and the sapwood, one of which would resist compression, and the other would actually be springy.
Ah.
So what you would do is you would pick the wood and find a particular tree, and one of the kings decided that he wanted more wood for bows, so this is why you got yew trees by many churchyards, because the yew supplied a lot of wood for bows. However, because of our weather, the trees didn't always grow straight and strong. The best bow staves came from the Mediterranean.
Oh, okay.
Where their wood would grow straight and strong. So most, for example, all the bows that came out of the Mary Rose, I think they found were Mediterranean origin.
Oh, okay.
And when Robert Hardy was alive, he was the world expert on longbows, and he was the only person that was allowed to get one of the bows from the Mary Rose and shoot it.
Oh, wow.
So it was very privileged for him.
Absolutely.
And testament to the strength of the wood.
Absolutely. To the last one.
But many of the archers made their own bows.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And they would be thicker than this one.
Yeah.
This is a modern one.
Yeah.
And you would build your bow, wax it, soot and wax mixed in, so you would preserve the moisture in it. And you wouldn't have a string on your bow all the time anyway, because what they say was the string makes the wood bend permanently, so it follows the string and it's not so powerful.
Ah, okay.
So what you would want is a strong bow, and archers were meant to be practicing archery by law from the age of 7 to 70.
Gosh.
And therefore, by the time you were 19, 20, you'd built your muscles and you built your accuracy, because you were required to practice archery every day after church.
Gosh.
At the butts, which is why you come across places called Butt Lane, which is where the archery was practiced. And eventually, when you were 19 or so, you would be able to shoot 15 arrows a minute.
Gosh, that's quick.
And hit a target the size of a plate at 100 metres.
Wow.
And that was normal.
That
was normally expected. Whereas Robin Hood, of course, had a reputation for a better shot than that.
Yes, of course. Now that brings us on to the fact that St Mary's is with the legend of Robin Hood, and he's supposed to have married Maid Marian in this church, but actually not in the church, is it?
They in medieval times they were married in the porches.
So the porch that I've just come through, that's where they would have married.
Yes, because that's a 13th century porch.
Yes.
So that dates from very early times.
Right.
It may well be that was where they were.
Yeah.
And I noticed when you came in, you noticed the font.
Yes.
Because this is the traditional place for a font.
Yes.
So you come into the church, get married, have babies, join the congregation, and then you're carried out at the end of your life.
Yeah. Everything we know about Robin Hood is, as we say, is legend.
Yes.
Is there any proof or any fact that he actually did attend this church?
No.
No proof at all.
The thing about Robin Hood is he wouldn't be in one place for very long because he was still outlaw.
Outlaw, yes.
What you were, if you broke any rules, if you did the hunting and everything, you were thrown outside your community. You were outside the law, and which is why so many people then lived in Sherwood Forest, because it was huge and you could hide. And not traditionally now, it's huge area, and people would travel through the forest in convoys for protection purposes. But there were plenty of hunting area, because forest doesn't mean trees. It's open heath land and cultivated land and forest, but it belonged to the king. And you were not allowed to hunt in it without permission. You weren't allowed to light fires because you were using the king's wood. So it was a very strict way, because you were beholden to your lord.
Yes.
And you did practice archery, because when the king called, the lord would have to provide a company of archers and a company of men-at-arms to go and fight for his purposes abroad.
Yeah. And I've been to Sherwood Forest and I've been to the Great Oak. But if I work things out back in time to when Robin was allegedly around, the oak would have been pretty small.
Well, funny enough, yesterday was the anniversary of the death of Major Rook.
Oh, right, Major Rook.
Who gave his name to the major oak.
Oh, was it? Oh,
so
wow.
he died many years ago.
Yes.
Or yesterday.
Yes, on the anniversary of yesterday.
Yes, it was.
Yes, I don't know whether I've worked that out correctly, but it said that Robin had hid in the tree and all this sort of thing. But if you go back to when he was allegedly around, the oak tree wouldn't have been able to
That's the whole point
hide
about
anybody.
Legends,
yes.
You can find out things, but because most people weren't writing, it's always by tales.
Tales, yeah.
And a good storyteller will embellish the tale.
Of course, and then somebody else would again embellish that story.
Indeed.
Because there is the one that he said that, I think I got this right, that shoot the arrow, and wherever the arrow lands,
Bury me.
Bury me.
Yes.
But if that's correct, someone shot that arrow 600 and some odd metres. And I don't think an arrow in those days, or even, I don't know about now, but would go 600 and some odd metres. Is that correct? Or?
I wouldn't think so, no. They have competitions for distances, and I don't think they've managed to get that.
No, of course not.
Even in a modern technological bow with all those fancy gizmos.
Yes.
Whereas this is just a pure bow with wood and a string.
And may I say, it's a beautiful looking thing.
Yes, it was made by somebody called Bickerstaff, who makes absolutely beautiful bows. Yeah. And it's been a joy to use it.
Yeah.
The thing about it is, though, this power of this bow I've got now is approximately a 50-pound pull.
Oh gosh, right.
So you're pulling 50 pounds of there, and what you would have to do is you practiced so that when you pulled your string you would draw it to the length of your ear.
Yeah.
And you build up your muscles so that you could draw quite quickly. This is a 50-pound bow. In Agincourt times, they were pulling 175 pounds.
Gosh, wow.
Which is why if an arrow hit somebody, it would either go through them or knock them off into the ground.
Yeah, sure.
So that's why the English archer dominated the scene.
Yes.
And that's why archery was a legend in this country, because we're the ones that took it seriously.
Yeah, of course.
Whereas on the continent, they often had crossbows. Because although they took longer to load, you didn't have to learn it very quickly.
Yeah.
So learning the longbow was a lifetime.
Wow, wow. And tell me, what more do you know about the history of the church?
Well, this church is actually, we have this written down because it's linked in with kings.
Yeah.
Many years ago, there were different kingdoms, and the kingdom of Northumbria, which was technically north of the Humber, but it wasn't, was ruled by a king called Edwin. And his kingdom was in this area. He wanted to marry and get his kingdom probably strengthened by marrying the Princess of Kent.
Right.
Now, the Princess of Kent was British name, of course, Princess Ethelberga.
Oh, right.
Now, we were a heathen country. However, the Pope sent across his emissaries, like Bishop Paulinus, to convert the heathen British into Christians. Of course, he crossed the Channel. The tunnel wasn't there, so he had to come by boat. And he converted the King of Kent's family first.
Right.
So Princess Ethelberga was a Christian. So she said to Edwin, I will marry you, but only if you become a Christian. So Edwin became a Christian and they were married. And as a result of that, he then became a defender of the faith. The trouble was, over in the west is a kingdom called Wales. And the King of Wales wanted to go and have his kingdom all across to the North Sea. And Edwin was in the way. He then brought his army, Edwin's army, and nearby, we believe, near a place called Cuckney, although it's called the Battle of Hatfield, and there's some speculation as where it is, because there's a Hatfield up in Doncaster and all sorts of things. But in the battle, Edwin was killed, and his head was chopped off. Now, his soldiers knew that he had to have a proper king's burial. So they grabbed his body and his head, and they came and retreated and buried him in a clearing in Sherwood Forest. Then they went away, and I think it was his nephew that beat up the Welsh.
Right.
When they came to take his body back to his capital city, which was York, they found people had been coming to his gravesite saying special things had been happening. So they put a wooden chapel up on the site of Edwin's grave. Now, in those days, saints or religious people used to attract people to visit them because they thought they'd be nearer to God if they had and visited the grave. So I think some enterprising people in the area started setting up inns and stables, all sorts, for the people who visited King Edwin's first resting place. And the village grew up around the church, which is normally the opposite way around.
Absolutely.
So for many years, in 625, he got married. At 633, he was killed, and the chapel was put up. Now, for many years, that was all it was. It was a small village, people visited, the story of King Edwin was told, and Saint Edwin was there, and his capital city was there. In fact, Edwin apparently married Princess Ethelberga in York.
Okay.
In a small church, which is now the site of York Minster.
York Minster.
So he's had an influence in the area. Many years ago, after that, we've got a wooden chapel here, just a area for people to stand, dirt floors. Then we've got the story of Henry II, who had his row with Becket. And his soldiers went to Canterbury, tried to just gently persuade Becket to change his mind, but they went a little bit too far and they killed him.
Right.
Henry was distraught, and part of his penance was to take soldiers around the country and get them to change wooden chapels into stone.
Right.
So this part of the church dates from 1175.
Right.
And we believe the Masons were having a bit of a laugh.
Oh, right.
Because up here, you've got Henry II.
Right, yeah.
And he's staring through eternity at Becket.
Oh, right.
So I think they had a sense of humour in those days.
It sounds like it.
So this was a church.
Yes.
Made of stone.
Yes.
And if you look, you can't really see the back wall up there. That's the original
Oh,
roof
the original,
line.
yes, I can
That's
see
the
that.
original roof line.
Wow.
Because like any church or any building, like a house, you've got an extension. So
Yes.
we've got a 1350 extension
Yep,
and a 1450 extension.
yep,
And you can tell by the circular pillars
yep.
and the hexagonal Tudor
Oh,
type
yes,
pillars.
of course, look at that. Yeah.
Now, when William the Conqueror came and took over this country, it was then started a tradition of having a church in the shape of a cross.
Yes,
That wasn't before. Before then, it was just a building.
yes,
But then they had the cross.
Yeah.
Because the followings of the cross were important.
Yeah.
And that's why you've got that wooden structure at the end there,
Yeah.
which is called a rood screen.
rood screen, yeah.
And rood is the name for cross.
Right,
So it's going into the inner sanctum where the cross is.
yeah,
So that dates, well, that's a more recent thing, but many churches have rood screens.
Yes.
So Holyrood, the Scottish Parliament, is on the site of Holy Cross Abbey.
oh, okay, yeah.
So that's why it's called Holyrood,
Holyrood.
which really means Holy Cross.
Yes,
So that's where that name comes from. So you've got rood screens, but the churches were there. Now, however, the fascinating thing we discovered by looking at the archives, well, we didn't look in the archives, the researchers did. This church is lined up east to west,
right, yeah.
which is what normally happens.
That's right, yeah.
But in 1175, they lined it up between, I believe, I might have the figures wrong, between the 6th and 7th azimuth, which is an astrological measure. So on King Edwin's Day, St. Edwin's Day, which is the 19th of October, sunrise is up the middle window.
Is it? Right, okay.
So the sun will rise up the middle window
Yep.
on St. Edwin's Day.
Ah,
Now, when you're thinking of 1175, the measurements are just
yes.
mind-boggling.
Exactly, yes.
So, yes, there have been people worshipping on this site since 633,
Gosh, that's amazing.
and they still are.
They still are.
And
Absolutely.
many times they will go for it.
Yes.
So, yes, we are temporary custodians of this church. However, because of the legend of Robin Hood,
Yes.
we are blessed with so many visitors.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
In fact, at one point, I went through the visitors book, bearing in mind not everybody signs it. And one year we had something like 4,500
Did you?
people sign the book from every continent of the world,
Yes.
apart from Antarctica.
Really? Oh, gosh, that's stunning, isn't it? It's amazing.
And so it's the legend of Robin Hood attracts people.
Of course.
Because if you're everywhere in the world and they say, where are you from? And you say Nottinghamshire, Robin Hood.
Robin Hood, exactly that. Yes.
And of course, it's a legend that appeals to Hollywood.
Yeah.
It appeals to boys and girls with bows and arrows and
Exactly.
dressing up at Maid's Marian.
Yeah.
And so we get tourism in the area.
Brilliant.
And sadly, I don't think we make enough of it.
Well, I'm not going to say that I'm going to be able to encourage many people to come round, but my following is growing slowly on YouTube,
Smashing.
and but I will enjoy a little bit of a walk round now and
Yes,
take some
absolutely.
photographs.
Yeah.
Greg, I really appreciate your time. Well, that was fascinating. Thank you very much, Greg. Really appreciate that. The history of this church is quite astounding. You know, when you think of the links with the legend of Robin Hood and Maid Marian in this area of Edwinstowe in Nottinghamshire, it's fascinating, and the different things that are around the church, the font, the stained glass windows are wonderful. We'll be looking a bit more at the stained glass windows in part 2, and we'll find out a little bit more from Greg about the church and a bit more, I believe, about the fact that he's a Sherwood Forester and a bowman. So we'll look forward to speaking to Greg in part 2.
If you've enjoyed this video on Kevin's Rambles YouTube channel, why not give him a subscribe and a like and comment on his videos? It'd be very much appreciated.